Hi, I'm Marshall Shore, Arizona's hip historian, and I want to welcome you to Tempe Town Lake. Now, what we're really here to talk about is the water, because what would a lake be without water? Now, the water here is not a new idea. The prehistoric Hokum Indians actually devised a canal system using that same water that became the foundation of many of the canals that we still use across the valley today. When pioneers relocated here to the Salt River, it ran uncontrollably. How to cross the river became a huge problem that was solved by Charles Trumbull Hayden and the Hayden Ferry. Bridges were no match for the rushing waters. To close out the 20th century, Tempe Town Lake was created with a rubber dam, which allowed then the 21st century growth to happen around Tempe Town Lake. Welcome to Casey Moore's Oyster House, near ASU, a landmark tavern popular with students, faculty, and locals alike. Some say there is a spirit of a younger lady that causes forks to fly across the room and has been seen on the stairway. Hackett House, 4th and Maple, named for Tempe's first telephone operator, Estelle Hackett. The oldest fire red brick in Tempe, this 1888 Arizona Territorial Victorian restored by the city of Tempe. This signifies the first phase of commercial development in Tempe. The Andre Building, 401 South Mill Avenue. The home of Rulabula, R.J. Andre, who built this building as a saddlery shop on the first floor, and the upper floor was a boarding house. So stop by this Victorian and neoclassical architecture and pick up a pint of Guinness. Tempe Hardware Building. This building was built in 1898 and housed the Oddfellows Hall and a hardware store on the first level. Then it became a hardware store owned by the Curry family from 1906 to 1976. At the turn of the 20th century, this was the social hub. Lardon Dines, an 1893 Victorian. Now, Lardon Dines were both prior members of Tempe and then opened up a drugstore that ran up until the mid-60s. It's rumored to have been a place where politicos met to make backroom deals. Valley Art Theater opened its doors to show movies in 1940. Harkins, a current local theater chain, has always been involved with this theater since the very beginning. In 2001, they completed a gorgeous renovation, keeping the original flair while modernizing the theater experience. Have you ever wondered how Mill Avenue got its name? Well, behind me is the answer. It's Hayden's Flour Mill. Now, originally there was an 1874 water-powered mill, but what you'll see behind is actually a concrete structure that's fireproof because of a 1917 fire. Now, the silos behind us were added in 1951 and were the tallest structure in Tempe until 2007. They still act as a beacon to let you know where you are on Mill Avenue, but also harken back to a day when agriculture and water brought Tempe to life.
Hello, my name is Hannah Barrett. I am the Senior Program Assistant for the AARP Arizona State Office. Welcome to today's Arizona Hip Historian Virtual Happy Hour Tour. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence and nearly 38 million members nationwide, as well as nearly 900,000 in Arizona, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most for families. In the month of March, we will focus on savings and planning by providing specific tools and information about managing savings and debt, as well as planning for retirement. The coronavirus pandemic, high unemployment rate, and economic challenges have made this information all the more important. Visit us at www.moneymap.aarp.org for resources and information, and visit www.aarp.org/nearme to see virtual events near you. Now I'll turn it over to Marshall Shore.
Folks, welcome to the show. Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very
Well, hello, good evening, everyone. Oh my gosh, I am so happy you can join us on this day after St. Patrick's Day. Uh, so we've got so much fun for you this evening. So I want to welcome all of you that are watching either on Facebook, YouTube, and some folks are even watching on Twitch. And so, today, not just the day after a very memorable St. Patrick's Day for the fact that not much happened. As well as today is also National Sloppy Joe Day. So if you haven't had dinner, maybe you want to try a little Sloppy Joe. It is also National Awkward Moment Day. So I'm sure we have all had some of those during especially the last year with COVID going on, some of those awkward moments, but I'm happy that you're joining us this evening. Now, for what can you expect tonight? Well, we've got some trivia. We've got some Arizona music history. We do a little bit of show and tell. I'll also be talking about a little Arizona town way up north. There's a cocktail, of course, as well as our special guest. And just wait. Oh, my gosh. So if this is your first time here, you might be wondering, who is that man on my screen and why is he there? Well, my name is Marshall Shore, and I moved here from New York. I actually was working in Brooklyn at this gorgeous 1906 Carnegie building. And, I had had enough time in the cold. I was ready for something a lot different. So I traded that for the Harmon Library, which is in basically just south of Buckeye, near 7th Avenue. And originally the building was a 1950 branch library, but the community had this rich oral history of kind of where it got to from, or how it got to where it is. And so that's what really got me thinking of, oh my gosh, not many folks are talking about that modern history. And, now they are in an amazing brand new building that looks so gorgeous. But they also had a mural that was done with a local artist and community kids. And they actually relocated that to the new library, which I think is really cool that they kept that little bit of history. Now, to do all this, we loaded everything we own into a big orange cube, a U-Haul. And, U-Haul has their International World Headquarters right here in the Valley of the Sun. And we promptly moved into a 1956 ranch. Now, when we moved in, it was oh so many tones of beige. I'm happy to say now it is a much more simplified, just 2 tones of seafoam and cantaloupe. And pretty much my house is a time capsule. I mean, look at all that buttercream yellow tile, that original yellow in the wall oven with no window, and even the push buttons inset in the wall to work that stovetop, and everything still works like a charm. Now, when I first got here, all I kept hearing about how there was no history here. But I knew that wasn't true because every time I went for an adventure, I came face to face with so many amazing people, places, and stories. And so that's kind of what keeps me going, is just all those amazing stories. And then there's that post-war boom. All those GIs that either were stationed here, trained here, or passed through on the way to somewhere else. And after the war, they were moving here in huge numbers, looking for a whole new way of life. Now, my name is Marshall, but I'm also known as the Hip Historian. Now, you might wonder, how do you get a name like the Hip Historian? Well, it's not just because I have on a lovely red and white polka dot jacket. Oh, no. It actually dates back from February 14th of 2012. We were having a huge celebration of 100 years of Arizona statehood. And they gave me 15 minutes on the main stage to talk about anything I wanted to. And I talked about an event called Mask of the Yellow Moon. It ran from 1926 to 1955 and was started by Charlotte Hall. And it was one of those events that was touted right up there with Mardi Gras as something that everybody in the country should go and see. And lots of folks did. And I was lucky enough at one point to find 3 dresses in a box. And so I had some amazing ladies don those dresses and parade around the stage as we talked about the Mask of the Yellow Moon and its incredible history. Well, and that's a lot of what I was doing pre-COVID. I was doing a lot of lectures, tours, and so those have really been kind of cut down. So that's why I started Arizona History Happy Hour, because I realized I'm not sharing stories and no one's sharing with me. And so that's why it was time for a change. And so I started doing this whole weekly program. Now we also have we've been doing since October, a walking tour of downtown Phoenix of haunted history. Our next one is April 10th, and that may be the last one, depending on how the weather goes. We shall see. Now, some of you have already found that there's a chat over on the side, so you can chat in there. If you'd like to reach out otherwise, you can reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or even email works. Now, if you are watching on Facebook, I will ask you, there's a little button at the very bottom of your screen that says share. If you can click on that, it would be so appreciated, so you can show all your friends how much fun Arizona history really is. And we're going to make sure that you have a lot of fun tonight. So, show and tell. So I have a house full of stuff, in case you can't tell from looking behind me. So I always like to pull something off and just kind of talk about it. And so we are going to talk a little bit about, so this is an American Airlines brochure on all the things you could do in Arizona when you come to visit. It's dating from 1956. And look, you could get here from New York first class for $266 pretty much. And that would have been luxurious first class, I have no doubt. As well as it tells you all the great places you could stay, such as the Skyrider Motel, which was the first motel at an airport anywhere in the country. And plus, it's such as a cool graphic. So, and it would not be happy hour without a cocktail. And I'm happy to say PJ, the bartender over at the Valley Ho, has been coming up with some amazing cocktails. And tonight is no different. It's a little different because there is a little bit of, well, actually, there's a lot of beer involved, but it's not just your standard beer. I'd never even heard of this beer until it suddenly showed up at my door. So tonight, and it's also interesting because it's a Boilermaker. So PJ doesn't even know this, but I am an alumnus of Purdue University that is the Boilermaker is the mascot. So we are doing a Baklava Boilermaker. So we are using some Four Peaks Baklava beer, as well as Arizona Distilling Company has created a whiskey called Humphreys using Kilt Lifter. And so, all right, so let's see now. All right, so let's see. So we have our Four Peaks right here in this lovely little growler. And I was amazed at how much this actually tastes like baklava, which was kind of interesting. So I think always likes to give me a task, so that way just to make sure that I'm staying proficient. And so, and then this is the Kilt Lifter whiskey. All right. And there we go. So, cheers. So indeed, so here is our baklava. Dang, that is so tasty. Whoever even, I'm like, baklava beer. All right. So moving on. So through the miracle of modern technology, or not so modern technology, I am so happy tonight to be able to share the screen with Lisa Heidinger. And so let's bring Lisa on. Oh, wait a minute. Let's Here, let me get rid of my bartender. Well, hello.
Hello. Why can't I see you, Marshall? I just see the little black screen, but I loved your alter ego there with the green hair.
So, because who doesn't want to be turned into a Muppet?
It's precious.
So I had a local friend make that for me. So, yeah. So Lisa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm an Arizona author and historian, although I didn't really think of myself as any kind of historian until I was in my 30s because I didn't realize history was all the stuff I cared about. I thought history was dates and stuffy men. And somehow then things knit together. And as you know, Arizona has so much wonderful history that I've been fortunate enough to be able to write articles and books. Used to do television, radio before that, newspaper before that. And any way of telling us an Arizona story is a good way.
I completely agree. And there are so many stories to tell about Arizona. So indeed. So, okay. So we do trivia here. Now, for those of you that are new, we do trivia a little bit differently than just kind of your standard bar trivia, where we'll go through the questions that are all multiple choice. So even if you don't know the answer, you can take a guess and you might come close to getting it right. Although some of these questions, even the answers are really good. So some of them I'm like, I just want it to be all of the above, but so, all right. So we have 10 questions. And so our first question, and you keep track of, some people keep track of it in the chat session. Some people keep track of their trivia on a notepad. You can keep track of it however you would like. All right. So our first question is, Foxboro had a ranch hand who would become a celebrity, but Kel Fox said his father had to let him go because A, he kept stealing bacon from the chuck wagon and they couldn't afford to keep him. B, he couldn't stay on a horse no matter how old or slow it was. Or C, he loved his own voice so much, he sang all night, keeping the other cowboys awake. So one of those answers, and the great thing is, we'll go through the answers, and Lisa will explain which one of these is correct, and it's a humdinger of a story. So...
we don't use the word humdinger enough, Marshall. That's a good word.
Well, it's like I have friends who are like, use all these arcane words. I'm like, they're not arcane. They might have fallen out of favor, but I'm trying to bring them all back. So
good for you.
All right. Question 2. After Bucky ONeill was killed in the Battle of the Rough Riders in Cuba, his widow remarried. The new husband was A, a former outlaw Bucky's posse had caught near Diablo Canyon. B, Bucky's grown son from back east who came out for the funeral. Or C, Bucky's younger brother, Brady. So one of those gentlemen became the new husband of Bucky's wife, or Bucky's widow.
I don't know how good my poker face is, but I'm trying to remain very impassive during these answers.
Well, I love how you held things up. You held some things secret up until like just moments ago when you're like, oh, so.
Now I shall share the rest of the story with you.
Exactly. All right. Question 3. Only once in recorded Arizona history did men try to break into a jail. That was in Gleason, and it was because A, desperados had fleeced them all of fortunes in a bad poker game, and they wanted their deeds and property back. B, captured a lot of bootleg liquor that was stored in there. Or C, famed border rebellion leader Pancho Villa was imprisoned and some wanted to hang him and some wanted to follow him. So one of those answers is why a group of men broke into a jail in Gleason. All right. Question 4. Billy Adams owned the Flagstaff Barbershop and the town of Winona. He had a very unexpected encounter with a celebrity. Where? A, he had set up camp on the San Francisco Peaks during a bear hunt. B, he happened upon the man stealing moonshine from his still out on the Hart Prairie. Or C, he met him at a barn raising near Mormon Lake. And all of those could be very plausible, but only one of them is the correct story.
I was surprised you didn't just burst into Route 66.
Well, I thought about it's like, and don't forget Winona.
Yeah, Windsor, Arizona.
So I know nobody wants to hear me sing. When I do karaoke, they're always like, yeah, no, we're not going to play your song back because it was painful. And that's okay. All right, question 5 and our halfway point. Why did Dada artist Max Ernst finally marry Dorothea Tanning? Was it A, she threatened to leave him for his best friend, Man Ray, if he didn't? B, to drive off a rich but annoying widow who wanted to become his manager and his wife? Or C, because he was invited to be a best man and didn't want to waste a trip to the altar? Again, all three of those could be very plausible, but only one. All right, question 6. Who protected Payson moonshiners from government agents during Prohibition by scattering across the countryside to issue a warning? Was it A, mules, B, local school children, or C, anyone in the town jail at the time? All right. Why did Lon McGargy call his bar the Last Drop? A, he famously lost his last drop of liquor in a poker game and he couldn't get over the indignity of it. B, he painted a picture of a cowboy giving his last drop of water to his horse. Or C, he always said he wouldn't die as long as there was one last drop to be drunk.
Marshall, give me just 1 second.
Nope, no worries. All right, question 8.
Thank you.
Ida
Jiang. Ida Jiang
survived the worst flood in Arizona history. Before that, she wouldn't let her husband back in after he came back from a trip because he had been with A, San Francisco songstress, Lotta Crabtree, B, Big Nose Kate, who lived in Prescott after Doc Holliday left, or C, Arizona historian Charlotte Hall. So, who was her husband hanging around with? One of those women. All right. Coming into the home stretch, here is question 9. The Biltmore stayed open during Prohibition because drinkers in the Whisper Room got a warning officers were on their way. And how? A busboy on the roof would shine a light through the stained glass ceiling. B, the police chief was a huge admirer of Frank Lloyd Wright's work and would call as agents were coming. Or C, a tripwire triggered a bell to ring loudly enough to be heard, even by all those drunkards. All right, question 10. And our final question. Eleanor Roosevelt was known to visit Tucson regularly. And why? A, she was a collector of silver and turquoise jewelry, and her favorite shop was downtown. B, her favorite bridesmaid lived there and hosted her. Or C, she knew if she went, Franklin would come for the warmth and no one would suspect polio treatment. So one of those is why Eleanor Roosevelt was a regular visitor to Tucson. All right. Well, while you're trying to figure out which are the best answers to some of those stories, while you're doing that, we're going to take a little bit of an Arizona music break. And so, because, I played the earlier video about Tempe because they mentioned Rulabula, or actually I mentioned Rulabula in it. And so, what better thing to talk about as for St. Patrick's Day as Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers. Now, Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers, they formed after a band called The Replacements lost some band members. Now, they were kind of just a bar band that really roamed from Phoenix to Tempe. And Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers have done so many albums. And they actually just celebrated last year their 20th anniversary of their Circus Maximus. And so they're planning another one for June. So some of you might want to go hear Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers down in Mexico. I had some friends that went a few years ago and said it was a blast. I can't imagine it was not. All right. So if you're ready for some answers, here we go. Oh, and Vera's having her corned beef cabbage as we speak right now. All right. So A, Foxboro had a ranch hand who had become a celebrity, but Kel Fox said his father had to let him go because he couldn't stay on a horse no matter how old or slow it was. So first off, what is Foxboro Ranch?
Foxboro is well, it's been torn down, but it was a property on Schnebly Hill Road for probably a century or close to it, maybe more than a century, almost up toward Flagstaff. And Kel Fox Sr. built this marvelous property called Foxboro. Kel Fox Jr. is the gentleman you're looking at in that picture. And when Kel Fox Jr. was in his 80s, he told me this story one time. Fox Ranch Road in Flag is right there, kind of next to Schnebly Hill Road, the exit on the freeway. So Kel was talking about Foxboro and when he was a kid and how a lot of young men would come out west. They were either, kind of just Eastern boys who wanted adventures or journalists who wanted to write stories or wanderers who wanted to work a while to get some money and put on some weight before they went off and starved again. And remember this particular ranch hand who was, he said, a likely looking fellow and a nice guy, but just couldn't stay seated on a horse, just couldn't. And my dad felt bad, but he said, son, I'm going to have to let you go because you really can't be a cowboy if you can't ride. And then Kel's talking. Maybe a month later, a big envelope came, and it was a bunch of pictures this fella had taken while he was staying with us of the family and the home and the property. It's too bad I don't know whatever happened to those. It's not everybody who has pictures taken by Ansel Adams of his childhood. And
wow.
Every time I saw either Kel or his widow, Patty, after he passed, I would always say, any shot of those pictures? And they'd always say, nope, nobody's found them. I still have there's some envelope stuck between two rocks in part of the old garage ruin or something. Can you imagine, Marshall?
I cannot. Having Ansel Adams photos of your house would be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And then to lose them. Well, that's like there was a photo shop over on McDowell, over in Miracle Mile, McConnell's, and I ran into them, and so we were chatting, and I was like, well, do you have any of the old photos? And I said, well, the prized photos we had were when Martin Luther King came to visit. But they said we had a cave-in on the roof, and it destroyed the negatives.
No.
And I was like, oh, my gosh.
Oh.
So, yeah. So, just think of all the photos that have just been lost to time. So.
I think that we'll see those in heaven.
I sure hope so.
Remember Father Guido Narducci and his thing about all the waiting for you in a big box in heaven? Okay.
Indeed.
Bucky ONeill.
All right. So Bucky was killed in the Battle of the Rough Riders in Cuba, and his widow remarried, and it was Bucky's younger brother, Brady.
This knocks me out, Marshall. So first of all, a lot of us have seen the Bucky ONeill statue in Prescott on a huge granite rock in front of Courthouse Square. And Bucky was amazing. He was in Tombstone during the OK Corral. He was a young journalist. He was a sheriff. He was a mayor. He ran a posse that did go. The Canyon Diablo answer was not all that far off track. He did catch a bandit in Canyon Diablo, who then joined up to the Rough Riders because he was so impressed with Bucky. He had a silver mine by the canyon. And Bucky ONeill's cabin is still on the canyon rim. So when he died, he left Pauline not only the mine, but a $200,000 insurance policy. And this is in 1898.
Oh my gosh, that would have been a chunk of change.
I bet it would have been a couple million today. So she didn't really need to marry. And I'm fascinated by this little triangle because Brady was 10 years younger than Bucky. So he was 5 years younger than Pauline. Bucky was 5 years older than Pauline. And I just felt like, what would it be to be Brady ONeill? And he was 10 when Bucky was 20. So he's hearing about this legendary older brother and his incredible exploits. And then he marries the widow. And did they just maybe both love Bucky together in proximity with each other and it felt like they loved one another? Or we don't know.
Yeah.
We know that Brady ONeill was very involved in this Arizona becoming a state. And he and Pauline were both state legislators at different times. She was very involved in suffrage. They were terribly civic. And the really sad part is that Brady ended up spending more and more time out in Los Angeles and finally committed suicide. And I just feel like maybe if you spend your whole life comparing yourself to your older brother and never quite being the legend that is Bucky ONeill, and then the one place that's your sanctuary, your safe place, your home, maybe you can't quite get shut of the idea that she is comparing you to your brother.
And so you can never get away from that comparison. Yeah. I mean, Bucky, is still a legend.
He's larger than life. And that statue,
yes.
The statue dedication.
Right.
And I could just picture Brady and Pauline standing there and him thinking, there is Bucky, literally larger than life. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. And so let's take a look at all the players in this love triangle.
So we've got Bucky first on what is my left, and I'm thinking everybody's left. And then Brady there in the middle. He was a fireman too, and he did a lot of work for making firemen in Phoenix get pensions in a cemetery. And then Pauline, the lovely Pauline over on the side. She owned a house in Prescott that her friend Frances Munns bought, and you can still see it on Senator's Highway.
Ah, okay. Very cool. All right. Only once in recorded Arizona history did men try to break into a jail. It was in Gleason, and it was because a lot of captured bootleg liquor was stored there.
I love this story. This was part of a prohibition speech. Apparently, the railroad depot was where some really good-sized casks of really quality bootleg liquor was taken. But the whole town basically wanted it and wanted it right now. And so the law knew that the only really secure place in town was the jail because it had a concrete floor, a thick concrete floor. So they figure all we have to do is ring the jail, and we'll hold everybody off. But they underestimated the thirst and desperation because the guys then tried to drill up through that concrete floor to liberate the liquor.
Oh my gosh, they even try to break in through a window, but they tried to
drill up through the floor. Yeah, because it was all guarded on the outside. So that was the only unguarded side. But wouldn't you guess that the sound gave them away?
I can only imagine. All right. Billy Adams owned the Flagstaff Barbershop and the town of Winona, which we can't forget about the town of Winona.
We can't forget Winona.
No. And he had a very unexpected encounter with a celebrity. Where? He had set up camp to go basically bear hunting at the San Francisco Peaks. Wow.
And Marshall, his grandson, told me this story, and I just love it. Most people then had more than one job. My dad said you were a scrabbler. You had to know how to build a stove, mend a harness. You had a business, you ran some stock. So Billy Adams and his neighbor were losing stock, and they had seen grizzly tracks. And one day the neighbor came by mid-afternoon and said, I've seen fresh track. I think we can get that grizzly, but bring some overnight supplies. I don't know if we'll get them today. We're losing light. So they go up on the peaks. They don't get the bear. They make their camp. They've just finished their beef and their beans, and they're about to put out the fire. And they hear, hello, the camp. And a man comes up to them, visibly distressed, clearly more of a city feller, and says, I've lost my party. We thought it would be a good idea to go hunting. I don't know where they are. And he's really scared. And they say, calm down, young fella. You're fine. You're with us. No more beef, but here's some beans. Here's some coffee. You take this blanket. Everything's going to be fine. We'll get it all squared away in the morning. So in the morning, they are told that he knows that the vehicle they drove there was parked on Schultz Pass Road. And they say, okay. And they orient him, go this way. Just keep going this way. I don't know where the car is on the road, but once you get to the road, you'll see it. And they don't really think too much more about it. So a couple weeks pass and a letter comes, Billy Adams, Winona. And in the envelope is a check for $300. And this is in like 1932. I don't know what it is in today's dollar, but it's a chunk of change. And the check is signed by Clark Gable. And Billy Adams' kids just want to jump up and down on him for not telling them that, by the way, while I was bear hunting, I met Clark Gable. But Billy Adams had never been to a theater, didn't know or really care who Clark Gable was, and naturally cashed the check despite his children begging him to save that autograph.
Well, and Clark Gable must have been busy around Arizona. I mean, honeymooning.
Exactly. And then I don't know if you know that he spent a lot of time in Tucson after Carol Lombard died.
So yeah, no, I mean, that's why he spent a lot of time here.
Yeah, yeah.
So
almost an honorary Arizonan.
Indeed. All right, question 5. Why did Dada artist Max Ernst finally marry Dorothea Tanning? C, because he was invited to be a best man and didn't want to waste the trip to the altar.
And that picture just knocks me out. I think the most wonderful portrait of 4 people I've ever seen. Figures that it would be art muses. So what we're looking at is Max Ernst with the white hair. And then I believe that Juliet Browner, who is Man Ray's fiance or wife, is to his left. Then Man Ray above him, and then Dorothea Tanning above Max Ernst. And years ago, when my dad and his sisters, we were sitting outside in Sedona at Poco Diablo, and the 3 of them had spent a lot of time there with their grandparents, who were Sedona and T.C. Schneble, and they were remembering that Max Ernst had lived up above Poco Diablo in what they knew as Doodlebug Ranch area. And that whenever anybody who was a villager, a resident of the little tiny town of Sedona, mentioned Max Ernst, they always added, sotto voce, that he lived with a woman he wasn't married to. And they couldn't not say that. It was like part of his name, because they were small town workers, ranchers and farmers. And the concept that anyone could simply up and live with a woman he wasn't married to was as foreign to them as if he had walked 6 inches above the ground. They just couldn't wrap their heads around it. But in any case, eventually he did marry the woman. And Man Ray asked Max Ernst to stand up with him because he intended to marry Juliet. And Max said, well, then you may as well stand up with me too. And they had the double wedding.
Oh my gosh. that is such a great story. And a lot of people don't realize Max Ernst spent so much time up in Sedona.
Yeah. Built a house and
yeah.
painted. Yeah.
So All right. And who protected Payson moonshiners from government agents during Prohibition? I was so hoping it was school children.
Wouldn't that be cute? Can't you just
I thought that would be
running about the
adorable. School children
countryside?
kind of scattered through the countryside, just waiting for the lawmen to come.
Like Heidi, yeah. Yeah, but they would put these cowbells on the mules' necks, and somebody had a contact inside the system who would make a phone call to say they're on their way up, and they would just scatter the mules and make them run and send them out, and the bells would ring like crazy. I don't know how much Prohibition Payson history you've read, but a lot of people swear that Payson Dew was the precursor to Mountain Dew. I've never even had a Mountain Dew, but they were very, very proud of their moonshine.
And so much of Arizona was very proud of all the liquor that was made here out in the countryside.
Absolutely. And did you ever hear that the churches right before Prohibition had an idea it was coming, and so they stockpiled wine in the basements, the Catholic churches?
No.
Yeah, I love that.
That's great. So, and the school children would have loved that as well.
Maybe they ran around chasing the mules. Maybe they were part of it.
That easily. All right. So why did Lon McGargy call his bar the Last Drop? He had painted a picture of a cowboy giving his last drop of water to his horse. So who is Lon McGargy?
Marshall, I love this story. And the other question I almost used for this trivia question was, Lon McGargy was married, A, never, B, 3 times, C, at least 7 times. Because if you look up Lon McGargy, he was married at least 7 times. And I'm fascinated by that careful phrasing. Why did we not know how many times he was actually married? But it was at least 7. He was a character. And if you love to drink at the Hermosa Inn, at Lon McGargy's bar, it was a little adobe that he bought and kept adding to and adding to and adding to. And he was such a wine, woman, and song guy that I'm going to add another story and another artist if I have just a second.
Of course.
Ed ONeill, who did Arizona's Centennial Stamp, who does those great dramatic skies and clouds, who did the sets for New Riders of the Purple Sage. Mm-hmm. Well, Ed ONeill was a collector of Lon McGargy's work. And at a reception one time up in Flagstaff said, kind of self-effacingly, I think Lon just, kept his habits fed by making enough art that even I could afford him. And so I have 3 Lon McGargys. And then he smiled and said, I was at a reception in San Francisco once, and I was telling a gentleman that I had 3 Lon McGargys. And a woman detached herself from a separate conversation and hung on me and laughed at my jokes and stroked my shoulder. And after a bit said, so did I hear you say you have 3 Lamborghinis? And when I told her, no, I had 3 Lon McGargys, she remembered she had someplace else to be. Now, every time I hear Lon McGargy, I think Lamborghini.
And I honestly would rather have the 3 Lon McGargys.
Who wouldn't? I mean,
exactly.
Gosh.
I mean, and I love Hermosa Inn. It is just, it's one of those only in Arizona experiences.
Yes. And his pictures up at the state capitol, his big murals, Lon McGargy's. Mm-hmm. When you go into the bottom floor of the Capitol, there are those massive pastel murals that he talked Governor George W.P. Hunt into financing. And 6th grade kids in Tucson at Whitmore Elementary got a field trip up to the state Capitol during 6th grade and the Phoenix Zoo. And I remember there's one called Water, and it's this nymphette goddess in a diaphanous sheer robe with a jug of water pouring back over her shoulder that the 6th grade boys couldn't believe they were allowed to look at, let alone in a state building. It's made quite an impression. It's still there. It's worth seeing.
Yeah, no, it is actually. And they did some plates, and so I actually have her on a little plate for Lon McGargy.
Oh, of course you do. I didn't know that.
So, well, I have a house full of stuff. So, as well as some of the A1 beer posters that he did.
Really? I've read about him. I've never seen one.
So yeah, so it's like so he did a lot of work that then A1. So you would buy a pack of beer and in it would be artwork.
God, I
So
love that you have that.
oh, at some point I'll have to invite you over. What
I
once
need to
once
see
all the
it.
world clears up a little bit more, I mean,
I'd love that. I would
yeah.
love that.
I mean, I have a feeling we would drink lots of baklava Boilermakers and lots of good stories.
I was going to say you'd never get me out of there. You're like, no, what's this? What's this?
Well, that's half the fun. I mean, it's like the house is meant to be like a playpen. It's like there's so much to look at. So yeah, and then and so on here you actually see the cowboy giving out of his Stetson that last drop.
Glad you found that.
So I was like, oh my gosh, we need to include that. So all right, so back to Ida. Jinung.
Yes, Jinung. Jinung. Isn't that a story? I didn't know until somewhat recently that the Walnut Grove flood was bigger than the Johnstown flood in terms of sheer volume of water.
Oh, I didn't realize that either.
And the only reason it's not as famous is fewer people died, but we don't really know how many people died because there were so many miners and Chinese workers camped in that area that they never did find out how many died. Their bodies washed down all the way to the Gulf of Mexico after this thing. And Ida, who is there kind of in the middle, was tough. She came out to Arizona as a girl, married Charlie next to her, who I think is a nice, tall, cool drink of water. And Charlie hurt his foot as they were leaving. So she drove the team 300 miles to Arizona, met Henry Wickenburg. He taught her how to cuss and drink and speak Spanish. And she lived a full life. The night of the flood in Walnut Grove, she woke up with a premonition and got to high ground and watched everything she had ever owned carried away. She was so lucky to survive.
Wow.
But I was tickled to read that Charlie, you've probably read, as I had, about Charlotte Hall kind of raising eyebrows because she would go off with just a guide on her journalism tours and not really pay attention to the propriety of having a chaperone if you're with a male as a single woman. But I didn't know Charlie Jinung was one of them. So then I looked up the years, and Charlie was about 5 or 6 years older than Ida and more like 10 or 12 years older than Charlotte. And I almost hoped that they had at least a very nice trip, Charlotte and Charlie. They didn't have to do anything untoward, but I hope that it was a nice little work spouse period of time spent out in the wilds of Arizona.
And so can you let people know, who is Charlotte Hall?
Charlotte Hall is Arizona's first official state historian and the creator of the Charlotte Hall Museum up in Prescott, because she purchased the governor's mansion, which is that tragically ramshackle log cabin building on the site of the Charlotte Hall Museum. And she wrote a poem called Arizona that some credited with getting Arizona admitted as its own state into the Union. Put it on every congressman's desk. And then when she was invited to the inaugural ball as a thank you for her poem, she wore a tunic made out of copper mesh that is on display at the Charlotte Hall Museum. Oh, can I tell you a quick Charlotte Hall quote, Marshall?
Of course.
This is my all-time favorite quote. She was writing to Tim Reardon being the Reardon Mansion Reardon up in Flagstaff. They were correspondents. And so she says to Tim in a letter, I am so glad, so glad, so glad that God let me be an outdoor woman and enjoy the big things. I couldn't be a tame house cat woman and spend sunny, glorious days giving card parties and planning dresses. I'm not unwomanly. Don't you dare to think so. But God made woman to joy in his great, clean, beautiful world. And I thank him that he lets me see some of it, not through a window pane.
And for the time frame she was doing this, I mean, she would have been raising lots of eyebrows just because she was very independent.
Yes.
Smart.
Yes.
I mean.
well-read, educated, but yes, independent, and recognized, I want to go preserve the stories that are unfolding in our state now, because someday these will be history. And that's what she did.
Right. Well, with like Mask of the Yellow Moon, it's like it started off
Right.
Mask of the Yellow Moon was based on a Pima legend about how the god of sun would give his rays to make the earth golden and warm. So she had documented that. And
I
so
did not know
the
that.
first Mask of the Yellow Moon was actually a copy of the Tournament of Roses. It was actually a flower show.
I didn't know that.
And then grew into this huge event once it got taken over by Phoenix Union.
That's
so
fabulous.
Yeah. See, I mean, there's always another story. That's
it's the braid, isn't it? It's always a braid. Yes.
All right. The Biltmore stayed open during Prohibition because drinkers in the Whisper Room got a warning that officers were on their way, and it was shining a light through the stained glass ceiling.
Isn't that wild? You can almost see the ceiling in that photograph. And what's funny to me is the reason that worked is that the Biltmore was way out in the desert all by itself. So a busboy sitting on the roof could see the lights of the patrol cars coming slowly across up to the Biltmore at 24th and Camelback from the city of Phoenix, which to us now is downtown. Right. And then would be able to shine the light down through the stained glass window, and somebody would notice it, and they would literally turn the bar around so it was a shelf of books again.
Well, and I know, and briefly, the Arizona Biltmore actually had turned it back into a speakeasy.
I've heard that.
Which I think is now closed again
because of the times.
Yeah.
Let's hope it reopens.
But I love that if you do get a chance to if you look at the very top of that terrell, you'll see a little bump. That is the searchlight. It's still there.
No.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I love is the fact that here you have this searchlight from Prohibition that's still visible from the front of the Biltmore.
How fabulous. See, this is why people should talk. I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, and and so every time I go there, it's like, oh, see. And so whoever I'm with, I tell the story of the spotlight and the Whisper Room, because it's like, it's such a beautiful building.
Yeah.
Although I do have to. So one of the options here was that it was Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, and and that's not true. It's not Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. It's his block, but it actually was MacArthur who was designing the building and brought on Frank Lloyd Wright as a kind of to help, because he was using his block design. He had been a draftsman for Frank Lloyd Wright.
Okay.
So it's not actually a Frank Lloyd Wright building, even though it uses his block. And they were constantly butting heads because it was like MacArthur wanted it to be 2 stories. Frank Lloyd Wright wanted this. It was like there was all this battle back and forth in terms of, well, what do we have?
Too many creative minds.
And Frank Lloyd Wright didn't want to kowtow then to a draftsman. So
now the muses were Frank Lloyd Wright's, right? The sprites?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Good. So those are Frank Lloyd Wright, and the block is a Frank Lloyd Wright design.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's one of my favorite places to go in town for Christmas, because they always do Christmas up in such a great classic way.
We used to do tea there every Christmas for years.
Oh my, honestly, the best high tea in Arizona.
Lovely.
Yeah.
But it's also lovely to sit out on that back patio, because you could either get ice cream and coffee from the little shop, or a drink, or a meal. So you have all these options, and you can just be out there on those huge, comfortable couches.
Yeah. And then they have that big roaring fire in the middle. Yeah. So again, I've never had a bad time there.
I haven't either.
So, yeah, it's that Arizona magic. All right. So our last question. Eleanor Roosevelt was known to visit Tucson, and why? Her favorite bridesmaid lived there and would host.
At the Arizona Inn. Go to Isabella Greenway King, huh?
Yeah. So can you tell us a little about Isabella? I mean, she's got quite a story as well.
Yes. Our first congresswoman, she used to roller skate through the halls of Congress to get around. She flew her own plane to Barnes.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, another independent thinker, obviously, but built the inn because the World War I soldiers who had been gassed couldn't work a full day. They weren't healthy enough, but she wanted them to have self-esteem and some money. So she built a furniture factory called The Hut. The Hut being where you'd have your coffee and donuts on the war front. And because she was so beautiful as a teenager in New York City that one time traffic literally stopped when she crossed the street, she was a very good saleswoman. Bloomingdale's carried her furniture, other places carried her furniture. The Depression came and put an end to that. So she built the inn just to be her own market, just to buy the furniture these guys were making.
Oh.
And that color, supposedly, was her going out at sunset and pushing up her sleeve and saying to a workman, paint it this color. The sunset on her skin was the color they painted the Arizona Inn.
Oh my gosh.
And there used to be a major domo there named Maynard Pike, who lived well into his 80s. And the first time I ever interviewed Isabella's granddaughter, Patty Dorr, at the Arizona Inn, they are famous for being discreet. They would never reveal a source or burn a celebrity. But Maynard Pike mentioned, unasked, that Eleanor Roosevelt had stayed there a great, great deal. And went on to say, she always looked as though she needed a good brush up. And I'm not even exactly sure what a good brush up is, but I love the idea of Eleanor being just slightly tousled, a little rumpled, not quite up to Maynard Pike's image of what a first lady should look like.
Wow. Yes, and somebody comments on the Arizona Inn is a beautiful place. And indeed it is.
I think the Arizona Inn is the Hacienda del Sol of Tucson.
I mean, such a beautiful place. And so we always ask, how did people do? I mean, I see people saying, oh, I only got 1 out of 10, but that's not the goal, is to see if you got them all right. But look at all the amazing stories that we now have.
And I want to thank you so heartily for not getting them all right, because I have 2 adult children and I was reading them the quiz before this began. And Marshall, I've never done a multiple choice quiz like this before. And I was afraid that my mentality would be something like, a playground game is A, Ring Around the Rosie, B, Soviet warfare, C, pantaloons, that I just wouldn't be able to come up with anything remotely resembling a good answer that wasn't the true answer. So if anybody didn't get them all right, I'm just relieved, because it wasn't as lame as I feared it might be before I started writing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I love the questions. I mean, the fact that they were even little history bites, even within the question. It's like, okay, who is Bucky ONeill? Let's talk a little bit about him, because a lot of people may not know who he is. So
he's great, isn't he?
I mean, it's like one of those legends, as you said, much larger than life, as his brother found out.
Yes.
See, and Anita says it the best. She got 3 out of 10, but she learned so much.
Oh, thank you, Anita. That's
so
beautiful.
And actually what I can do is I can actually, and see, look, I can even put it on screen. So there, see, Anita, and she learned a lot. And that's really why I even do this, is because it's a great moment to learn. Again, there are so many amazing stories in Arizona, and that's really the fun of doing this whole program.
Well, you gave us like 24 stories in that first little tidbit from Tempe. My head was spinning. Yeah, man, that was a huge amount of information.
So, and that was actually a project I did with Tempe Tourism, as just kind of like here's like a snapshot of watch this. And so, yeah, I mean, we did 3 different videos with City of Tempe. So that was so much fun.
Fabulous.
Yeah. And so I kind of rotate those, and then in some other videos as well. So I always like to give like a little landing strip before the show starts, so everyone gets a little tickle saying, hey, we're about to start. So, yeah. So, Lisa, so how are you doing with COVID and everything? Are you spending a lot more time writing?
Well, no, I would love to say I am. I am working on a book, History of Land in Arizona. But truthfully, I think I'm spending more time binge watching things and taking walks. It seems like there's only so much brain power to any given day through all of this. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And I found myself binge watching things I shouldn't be binge watching just because I have other things on my plate. But I'm like, again,
We
that
have
it
to be
just,
okay.
yeah, exactly. So,
But spring is coming, and
indeed.
it is so delicious to let ourselves know people who are vaccinated, be somewhere on the vaccination path ourselves, see that we're coming up to being on the vaccination path, and things that we thought were rights had turned out to be privileges, like hugging, having coffee outside with friends. And I think that it is going to be so sweet to have those things back, don't you?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I so miss meeting friends for coffee and
Yeah,
just sitting there and chatting.
yeah.
Yeah. So just
But
those,
you've really helped by doing this. It's
ah,
something that happens every week. We can count on it. It's such a gift. It really is. It's a ministry, and it's amazing what you do. Thank you.
thank you, Lisa. And I look forward to being able to share a cocktail with you or a cup of coffee. Doesn't matter which.
Amen
So,
to that. Thank
all
you.
right. Well, have a great rest of your night.
And you.
So, all right. Thank you so much.
It-
Oops. So, oh my gosh, wasn't that amazing? So again, so maybe when you were starting the program, you thought, why should I share this? Now you see why you should be sharing this with your friends on Facebook so that everyone else can hear some of those amazing stories. So I vote we all give a little round of applause for Lisa because it's like, oh my gosh, the stories that were packed in to each question were pretty amazing. So now we come up to Little Arizona. So I mentioned that I moved here from New York, but I actually started in a very small Midwest farm town and of 25 people. And so it had two roads that crossed, and that was pretty much about it for the town. And so, I love the fact that Arizona not only has the fifth largest city in the country, but also some really amazing small towns. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Moccasin, Arizona. So it's right up there on that very kind of northern edge along Utah. It's part of the Arizona Strip, not far from Colorado City. It has a population of about 94. It's in Mojave County, was founded back in 1863, was when it was first deeded. Now, it really got its start back in the late 1800s when the LDS leaders were organizing settlements from southern Utah and northern Arizona. And Moccasin gets its name from near the town site. They actually found moccasin prints in the earth. And so that's why they chose to name it. If you notice, it's also smack dab in the middle of the Kaibab reservation. And so the town existed. And then in the late 1910s, or actually early 1900s, the reservation grew up around them. So the city is still there in the middle of the Kaibab reservation. And so you can still go tour. Not far from there is Pipe Springs Fort, Windsor Castle. And that was a fortified ranch house at Pipe Springs, was nicknamed Windsor Castle because the first rancher that managed it, and also one of its builders, was Anson Windsor. Now, if you do go to Moccasin, you can also visit the Big House, which is called that because all the other houses of the same time period would have been like small shacks. And so it was it's still, it's been redone and is still quite used by the community. It would have been the hub at that point of the community and of religious worship. And they actually do a moccasin day. And I don't know if they're going to do it this year or not, but it's like where Mormons kind of doing that honeymoon trail. They talk a lot about the whole Mormon kind of the Arizona Strip of history. And you can also go find, there is the Heaton family, and there is a monument. Basically, Jonathan and Lucy Heaton, they were the roots of the Kaibab ward for the Mormon Church. And this was dedicated during one of those moccasin days. And it's right next to the temple. So, it's like doing this. It's like my list of places to go in Arizona is now growing exponentially. There are so many towns that I'm looking at that it's like, I need to go visit more places. As well as now I'm hitting up the Arizona Historical Society saying, hey, I need more information on this town because I want to go and explore. And I just want to know more about the history of it. So coming up next week, we have Carol Poor, who started a program several years ago called Phoenix Fabulous History Murals. She's done storytelling events as well as murals. So we're going to get a chance to talk about some of the history contained in those murals. And so it's going to be a great time as well. So I hope to see you back here, same bat time, same bat channel. And remember, if you have any questions, stories, or suggestions, you can either throw them in the chat, or you're welcome to reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or good old-fashioned email. Indeed does work. So also coming up, we have 2 more rounds of the LGBT storytelling project, and that is with the City of Phoenix and South Mountain Storytelling Institute. We've already done 2 of those and had a blast. 2 more are on the docket. And don't forget, we have our tour coming up on April 10th, where everyone's wearing a mask. And, and as we get ready to say goodnight, I always want to give a shout out to my friends Cole and Chris, who did that amazing video at the beginning, panning across that desk, as well as my amazing cocktail advisor, PJ Vader Barron. And we get ready for a little bit of outro music from Mr. Ho, a basically gentleman from Sunny Slope, now living on the East Coast, who has his own orchestra, rewrites as well as digs up old pieces and plays those. So, so everyone, I wish you all a very good night. Hopefully you survived a kind of nonchalant St. Patrick's Day as we get ready for lots of more fun coming down the pike. All right, everybody, have an amazing Arizona evening, and I will see you next week.